Hi, I'm Ari, I'm the Oak Witch, and in today's video I'm going to be discussing magical timings in Spellwork. So when we perform spells, rituals, give offerings, something that many pagans, witches or occultists like to do is line up this action in accordance to a specific magical timing. So this is a point in time which has a specific metaphysical correspondence or a significant magical meaning that aligns with that point in time. It could be astrological or cosmological, and doing magic in accordance to this specific timing can act as a layer of correspondence in our spellwork. I've already done a video discussing the spell crafting and spellworking process, and I do touch on magical timings in that video, but I thought I would dedicate an entire video to this concept of magical timings, going into depth about certain magical timings and what you can incorporate in your regular magical practice and specifically for spells and rituals. So I'm going to be going over lunar magic, solar magic, planetary magic for example. Some systems of magic such as planetary magic kind of deserve their own video, so I might dedicate an entire video to that one specifically, for example. But yeah, I hope to just go over them all briefly and give you guys an insight into how you can incorporate magical timings in your practice. But something to consider with these magical timings is that they are not a necessity, they're not a requirement. It can really help boost your magic and make it more effective as it acts as this layer of correspondence, but it's certainly not a requirement. If you just need to do the magic and you can't wait until the next full moon or the specific planetary hour and you just need to do the magic, the best thing to do probably is just to perform the working. It will still be fine and effective. But of course, paying attention to these cycles and adding in these magical timings can really help. So yeah, the first one I'm going to be talking about is lunar magic. Now this is essentially magic according to the cycle of the moon. As we all know, as the earth rotates around the sun, the moon rotates around the earth, and it's this cycle in which we see the moon go through specific phases of illumination, and we can see specific shapes the moon kind of goes throughout the month. And of course this happens all throughout the year, and we get the phases of the moon, starting with the new moon. Now there is some disagreement here. I tend to go by the astronomical sort of sense of the new moon being that it is the dark moon where there is nothing in the sky. A lot of people say that as the dark moon, and the new moon is like the tiny slither of light that we see. I tend to just go for the new moon where it's completely dark and you can't see the moon. And at the new moon, this is all about planting new seeds and kind of preparing for new beginnings, sort of gathering your thoughts and beginning to make plans. It's kind of like the beginning of the cycle, so spiritually we see that as the same idea as well. As the moon grows, we see the waxing crescent, and this is like a slither of illumination that appears. Now, symbolically, obviously, this is the idea of things are growing, setting your intentions and moving forward with your plans. This is a sapling growing. So things are building and that energy is rising. We get to the first quarter, so this is the first half of the moon being illuminated. And symbolically, I always saw this as just continuing to push forward in your endeavour and moving along with the plans you have set, and that energy still rising. We then get to waxing gibbous, so this is where the moon is nearly full. It's not full completely, but it looks like it's almost illuminated with just a tiny bit left to go. And this is what I always see as still going, you kind of like the last legs of the journey. You're just refining your focus and pushing forward, the last stretch to go. And then we get to the full moon. Now this is a very powerful time. The moon is fully illuminated by the sun's light, and we get to enjoy what we've been growing. We can harvest our efforts and reap those benefits. This is a very powerful time because a lot of people do a lot of big magic around these times, big spells or rituals, because there's a lot of energy going around. And yeah, as we get over the full moon, we then get into the waning phase, where we start with waning gibbous. As the waxing phase, as we've just had, is all about attracting things into our life, growing things, sort of perhaps more related to abundance abundance and manifesting things in. As we go into the waning phase, this is about decreasing, letting things go, banishing. There's that removing energy that we then focus on. So the waning gibbous is obviously not a full moon. It's decreasing slightly, but it's not quite half. So it's the beginning of the decrease. And I always find this as a time for introspection, just thinking and reflecting on what has just happened and where you're about to go next. Last quarter is the next phase of the moon. It kind of reflects the first quarter where it is illuminated in half, but obviously it's the other side. And this is a time where you are really letting things go and releasing that energy. Identifying that things are coming to an end, where we get to the last sort of portion of the moon phase, which is the waning crescent, and this is just a last sort of slither of illuminated light on the moon. And this is about recuperating and resting, kind of dealing with the fact that it's coming to an end, and yeah, then preparing for the next cycle of the new moon, and then it starts again and sort of flows through that cycle continuously. So that is essentially, in a nutshell, lunar magic. I think meanings can differ according to practitioners, but that's how I've always understood it as, and I find it really nice to flow with the moon cycles in your practice and acknowledging a new moon and a full moon and where you're at. Really nice exercise in the Witch's Path by Thorn Mooney, which I kind of started incorporating in my practice. I think I've mentioned him on my channel before, is journaling at every new moon and full moon and just seeing where and how my practice kind of flows with the ebb and flow of the moon and those energies. So that's something you can definitely incorporate in your sort of magical practice as a whole, journaling in accordance to this sort of lunar magic. And of course, when we're getting into spell work, if there's anything you're wanting to attract in your life, perhaps do it according to the waxing phase. And if there's anything you want to let go of, banish, or get rid of from your life, then obviously you can do that with the waning phase. So the next timing of magic I want to talk about is this concept of planetary magic. Now, this is a name which actually kind of deceives many beginners, because the classical 7 planets people talk about when referring to planetary magic actually refers to 5 planets and 2 luminaries. So planetary magic, yeah, just refers to this concept of using the 7 classical planets in any sort of spell or ritual context. And these 7 planets are the sun and the moon, obviously not technically planets in our modern definition of that word, but also Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, and yeah, just those 7. So when we look at how people used to understand what planet was, pretty sure people used to just perceive it as moving objects in the sky, so celestial objects. And I think this comes from the ancient Babylonians and then thus the Greeks, who kind of adopted their astrological information. So our definition of what a planet is obviously has changed over time. A lot of planetary magic involves the creation of sigils or talisman and amulets, as well as working with specific spiritual entities such as planetary deities or planetary archangels. And a good book which goes over this in a really nice beginner format is Practical Planetary Magic, Working with the Magic of the Classical Planets in the Western Mystery Tradition by David Rankine and Sorita DSD. This is a really, really good book. It's great for a beginner in planetary magic. It kind of goes over a lot of interesting things such as the individual planets and their correspondences, goes over this sort of planetary deities and archangels, spiritual creatures of each planet, and goes over meditations, goes over sigils, planetary hours and how to calculate those, kameas. It goes over a lot of these really core aspects of planetary magic, and I recommend this if you're interested this further, because all of that sort of stuff is very crucial to planetary magic, but it kind of deserves its own video and its own book. So if you are more interested in this, I do recommend reading this, because I won't be able to go over it in this video. But overall, each planet has its own specific energy, and part of planetary magic is tapping into that energy so we can feel those effects on our lives according to the law of correspondence. So here are the classical planets, and in brief, here is what they're mostly focused on. Starting with the sun, which kind of involves works of wealth, involving powers of success, joy and health. We get into Mercury involving works of the mind and powers of deception or travel or communication. Venus is involved with works of beauty, corresponding with fertility, love and art. The moon is kind of involved with works of mystery, involving things like divination, dreams or intuition. Mars is involved with works of power, involving strength, passion and ambition. Perhaps also conflict, with Jupiter involving works of expansion, corresponding with politics, fortune and luck, and Saturn kind of involves works of form. So we're getting into limitations, boundaries, or discipline or duty. So that is very, very brief. I'm just kind of listing correspondences. There is a lot more nuance when we're getting into these planetary energies, but I just wanted to give in brief what you're kind of looking at. And of course, when we get into actually looking at these planets, we get into planetary timings according to the days of the week or planetary hours. With days of the week, each planet kind of corresponds with a specific day. The 7 days, 7 planets, and each day has its planetary energy. So when we're looking at spell work or rituals or even giving offerings and such, any magical practice, we can align that with a certain day of the week which corresponds with that planetary energy. So Monday is ruled by the moon, which kind of corresponds with water, so we could do works of divination here or dream work. Tuesday is ruled by Mars, so this is the fire element, and there's lots of different workings you could do here, but some examples could be crossings or reversals. Wednesday is ruled by the planet Mercury and the element air, and here you could do works involving travel or any communication between two people. So we get to Thursday, which is ruled by the planet Jupiter and the element earth, and this is where we're looking at works of prosperity, any abundance workings or luck, any workings involving your health or any financial situations. Friday is ruled by Venus and the element water, and here you'd want to do workings involving love, self-love, maybe glamour magic, maybe any sex magic. Saturday is ruled by the planet Saturn and the element earth. Here you might want to do any protection magic, binding spells, banishing spells. And then we get to Sunday, which is ruled by the planet Sun, by the element fire, and here I think a lot of people tend to do big magic, big workings, or also things like setting your intentions or manifestations, but generally I see it as something which involves any type of magic just in a big sort of format. So as kind of touched on before, there are planetary deities, and this isn't a history video, so I'm not going to go into depth, but over time, different polytheistic cultures kind of associated their own deities with these planets. So obviously, as the Roman Empire expanded, the Romans syncretized their deities onto the existing Greek ones, so that's why we kind of see those parallels. But I'm just going to go through the days of the week and kind of the deities usually associated with those specific days. This is something you can consider if you do work with those deities, so obviously that's a great time of the week to perhaps do special workings with that deity or petition that deity for a specific spell, for a ritual, whatever you decide. But it's nice to sort of know to line that up. With Monday we have Roman Lunar Diana or Greek Selene or Artemis. With Tuesday we have Roman Mars, Greek Ares or Anglo-Saxon Tyr or Norse Tyr. Wednesday we have Roman Mercury, Greek Hermes or Anglo-Saxon Woden or Norse Odin. Thursday we have Roman Jupiter, Greek Zeus, we have Anglo-Saxon Thunor, and we have Odin Thor. Friday we have the Roman Venus, Greek Aphrodite, Anglo-Saxon Frigg, and obviously the Norse Frigg or Frigga as well. Saturday there is the Roman Saturn and Greek Kronos, and Sunday we have the Roman Sol and the Greek Helios. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there is this concept of a specific hour of the day being ruled by a planet, and there are ways that you can calculate it properly. There are also apps that do this for you, and I'll leave some link down below to help. But I thought I would show you this chart that is from The Crooked Path in Kelden. This is just the book that was literally here to show you, and he's drafted up a sort of planetary hour chart which is quite useful. So there you go, and you got that from Agrippa's 3 Books of Occult Philosophy. So you'll find that planetary magic is something which is seen quite a lot in the grimoires. It's quite an ancient practice of magic and also very useful. So you can sort of look at things like this as well, but you can also calculate it. I'm not gonna go through the maths, I can't lie. But this book actually helps you in making those calculations of the proper planetary hours, so that is also something which you can do in here. Now the next magical system, which of course is really useful in magical timings, is astrology. So throughout the year, of course, we see planets and other celestial bodies and objects in the sky move throughout the year, and we can track these movements and identify those patterns and how they have that as above so below influence on our lives here on Earth. For example, working with zodiacal energy according to the sun, as right now we're in Gemini season, so it can definitely be helpful in identifying these in accordance to our spell work and using that zodiacal energy. My friend Capt actually started making some really helpful YouTube videos on astrology. I, hands up, admit, astrology, zodiacs, it's not my strong suit. It's not something I pay massive attention to in my practice. It's not really my kind of thing. I'm not an expert on it at all, so do recommend checking out his channel. He has really good 101 videos at the moment going through the basics and kind of teaching you in a really effective way. So do recommend his channel. Please go watch it if you're more into this. I'm useless at astrology, so do recommend that. But I thought I would include a astrology section here because it'd be remiss if I didn't bring it up here, as it is something which you can pay attention to in your spell work. It is useful. I thought I would give a list of the zodiac signs according to the season, the sort of times that they're sort of active, and their planetary and elemental ruling and the sort of description of the energy they focus on. There's 12, so I'm not gonna go over them because I think it'd be quite boring to listen to, so I'll have a sort of big text box in front of me here where if anyone wants to make notes, you can just jot that down or take a picture. You can just read this here. So the last kind of segment of this video is going to be talking about festivals. When we get into this concept of magical timings, we're going to come across specific days of the year which kind of has a magical or pagan significance that many modern pagans, witches, occultists tend to acknowledge and perform specific magical practices on. Most notably, we have the Wheel of the Year, which is 8 seasonal festivals, 4 fire or solar festivals, and 4 cross-quarter days. And this is something which a lot of people incorporate in their practice, and that's fine. It's not really something that I do anymore, but I did growing up. There's a lot of misconceptions with the Wheel of the Year, one of which is the fact that it is an ancient Celtic calendar, and that's not true. The festivals are inspired by or taken from Irish Celtic and some Germanic ancient festivals, but the actual festivals in this neo-pagan Wheel of the Year context is entirely modern. I actually might do a video discussing the history of the Wheel of the Year. I already made some notes, but I think I might do a separate video for that because that might be interesting. If you guys want that, let me know. I might do that next, perhaps. But I won't go into the history here because it's long and complicated. So I'm just going to be going over the festivals in brief here. I don't think there's anything wrong with people wanting to celebrate the Wheel of the Year. I just think it's worth identifying the actual original cultural context to these festivals and paying respect to that. Another criticism of the Wheel of the Year is that it's not really universally applicable. Of course, these festivals are based upon a specific climate, and it's not something which is really applicable outside of the UK and maybe Northern Europe, so a lot of people tend to adapt them to their own climate, and I think that's great. But in the process of acknowledging the initial cultural context of these festivals, it is worth doing some research and yeah, just being respectful in that case, I would say. So we start with Yule, which is the winter solstice, and this is around the 21st of December. It is the shortest day and the longest night of the year, and a lot of the celebrations involve kind of like, it's a time of rest and for looking within ourselves and kind of recuperating as we get to winter. Imbolc or Candlemas is usually the 1st or 2nd of February, and it involves this concept of the start of spring. This is where the first signs of spring kind of light up and we see it across the landscape, and it's kind of like rejuvenating the land. So spiritually we see this as beginning new projects, and we can see things setting intentions, planting our seeds and waiting for that to kind of grow. Next we have Ostara, which is the spring equinox, and this is usually the 21st of March. So here the day and night are equal in length, and this is the peak of spring. We're beginning new adventures, we're taking risks, and our plans are starting to come into fruition. Beltane, Bealtaine or May Day is the 1st of May. The days are continuing to grow in length, and this is where we begin to thrive in our environment. It's a celebration of being alive and the joy that brings. I feel like around this time there's a lot of really active energy, so this is where things are kind of moving, the energy is really shaking up, in like stark contrast to where we see with Yule, where it's a lot of resting and hibernation. Litha or the summer solstice is on the 21st of June, and this is where we begin summer. It is the longest day and shortest night of the year, and this is really all about celebrating the power of the sun, what that is doing for the land, and yeah, this leads us into Lunarsar or Lammas, which is August 1st, and this is all about beginning our harvest. The days here are growing shorter, so we are kind of like waning down and we're harvesting our efforts, and this is just the beginning of that. We then get to Mabon or the autumn equinox on the 21st of September. Here again the day and night are equal, but the days are getting shorter with the nights getting longer. And this is another harvest festival, and we're again just harvesting our efforts, and we're reaping those benefits and feeling the rewards of our efforts from the year. This then leads us to the last festival, which is Samhain or the autumn equinox, and this is on the 31st of October, also known as Halloween by many. And here this is where the days are definitely much shorter now. This is the last of the harvest, and at this time people tend to do a lot of spirit work and ancestor veneration. The concept of the thinning of the veil comes from the spiritualist movement in the 1900s, so this isn't actually something which is maybe even true. So a lot of people tend to view Samhain as kind of like, oh, this time of year the veil is thin so we can work with spirits and contact the dead. But this isn't something which is unique to Samhain. This thinning of the veil is something which came from the spiritualist movement, so I wouldn't necessarily see it as something specific to Samhain, but many people do. There's many things to criticise about the Wheel of the Year, and I will do so in this next video. If you guys want to see that, me go into the Wheel of the Year in depth, but there's a lot of things to say. For example, Aidan Kelly, who put the names of Mabon, Ostara and Litha onto those festivals. He placed those on much later in regards to this concept of the Wheel of the Year, so many people criticise it for things like that, and there's a lot more to say, but I will leave it at that for now. Regardless of the criticisms, a lot of people in the wider pagan community do acknowledge the Wheel of the Year as a sort of cycle of nature we can acknowledge and focus on throughout the year. This process of coming out of winter into something which is where the land is growing, nature is thriving, begins to thrive when it's at its peak in spring and summer. As we come into the autumn, this is where the land starts to die back, and we see a lot of the land going into rest mode and rejuvenating and kind of going underground into the land where it is hibernating until we get to spring, where it grows again as the sun is back in full force. So a lot of pagans tend to look at the Wheel of the Year as this kind of ever-turning cycle of the seasons of nature, and I do think that's really lovely, but there is a original cultural context to these specific festivals, which don't actually really have much to do with our neo-pagan understanding of these festivals, so that's something I'll go into in a different video, but it's worth acknowledging that in terms of how we understand this wheel. But something else I feel like people should consider more is to be a witch, to be a pagan, you don't have to acknowledge the Wheel of the Year. I certainly don't really anymore, and something which I'm a lot more focused on is folk festivals in accordance to the culture that I'm in. So I practice English folk magic, I'm an English folk witch, and part of English folk witchcraft is looking at the folk festivals that we have. So a lot of folk festivals involve looking at certain saint feast days, but in England specifically we have Plough Monday or May Day, or we have Mischief Night. Mhara Starling in her amazing book Welsh Witchcraft kind of speaks about the similar concept of Welsh folk customs and how this leads to Welsh festivals such as the Mhara or Kelden May, and she talks about a lot more other ones which I will butcher the Welsh pronunciation of, but if you're interested in the sort of Welsh folk festivals, definitely recommend her book. So that's something you can consider. Look at the culture that you're in and the specific regional festivals, and you can incorporate this in your magical practice. And it's really fun to do so, learning about the folklore, folk customs and folk traditions of where you are already. A lot of these folk festivals tend to have a magical or spiritual significance to them, so it is always fun learning about the history of your region in that way. A lot of people tend to also incorporate mainstream holidays such as the New Year into your practice. I have my own special traditions that I do on New Year in accordance to my own personal development, and it's things that I do each 1st of January to sort of help my own personal development and spiritual practice. So it's definitely something you can consider in your practice if you want to utilise these more mainstream celebrations or days of the year. You can do that in your practice. There's people who celebrate their birthday in their magical practice. Your practice is what you make of it, and this is certainly something you can do. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was interesting. I hope it maybe gave some inspiration for how you can acknowledge certain times of the year in your practice and your spellwork and your rituals. There's no rules really, there's no requirements for doing these things, but it's certainly something that's fun to acknowledge, to focus on these cycles that happen on our earth, in the stars, in ourselves. Yeah, have fun with it and get creative. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a like because that really helps me out, and yeah, let me know if you want that Wheel of the Year history video or a Planetary Magic video. Let me know down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on perhaps if you guys would want to see that. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.